Now, as I've told you before, and as I say often, Sandra and I, my wife and I, are thoroughly satisfied customers when it comes to our church. This is the only church my kids ever knew, okay? They just think this was normal church. And having raised 3 kids and having been in small groups since the very beginning, we absolutely love our church. And the reason that it has worked so well is not because I'm a good preacher or because I preach. The reason it has worked so well is because you have made it work. That hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of you have embraced the mission and the vision of this church, and you just make it work. And the longer you are here, the less aware you are of how phenomenal you are. And I was reminded of that this past weekend. I have a good friend. He and his family have been in our church for over 10 years. They raised 2 of their kids, like grown and gone, and they have 2 other kids that are coming through, elementary school and middle school. So they moved back home to be close to family. And so last weekend, they were back in town, actually for Walking Wisely weekend, because their 2 kids did not want to miss Walking Wisely. So they came back to town for Walking Wisely weekend. So we were having breakfast. And he said this. He said, Andy, he said, I love North Point. They were at North Point in Alpharetta. I love North Point, and I just appreciated it so much. But he said, I had no idea how good it was until we left. And he told me about the church they're in now. And it's a really good church. It's a really big church. It would be probably the best church in the city where he goes to church. He said, but there's something missing. He said, I got to tell you. He said, there is just not the commitment to excellence that there is at North Point. So I immediately thought he was talking about the preaching. I said, thanks, Dave. Anyway, but he wasn't, of course. And so as I drilled down, because I'm always interested, always trying to learn, always trying to make it better, and here's what I discovered. He was talking about you, and he was talking about what his kids have experienced. He was talking about family ministry, and I said, Dave, I'll tell you the difference, okay? You're gonna sound like I'm bragging, and I am. The difference is this. Every church has volunteers. We don't just have volunteers. We have engaged leaders who get it, who understand why we're doing, they understand what we're doing, they understand how important it is. We don't just have people who are like, well, if nobody else will do it, I'll raise my hand and volunteer. Every church has volunteers. We have extraordinary people who are extraordinarily engaged and extraordinarily committed to what we're doing, who've embraced our mission and embraced our vision. And one of the reasons that, yes, thank you. We got one guy over here that's excited about that. Again, for somebody who's been in from the beginning, I'm so grateful. And one of the things that has freed you up to do that, and maybe this is part of the story that you don't know about, is 21 years ago when we launched this whole thing, we pretty much departed from every single church tradition that most of us had grown up with, and not because they were bad, but we discovered that much of what had become, commonplace about church was actually began to get in the way of the mission of the local church. And Jesus established the mission. We can't debate that. That's a non-negotiable. He said the mission of the church is to make disciples. That the mission of the church is to make disciples. That is, wherever there is a church, there should be more people who are beginning to follow Jesus. Or maybe another way to say it is simply this, is to draw people to Jesus. It's to draw people to Jesus. Sometimes we say to lead people into a growing relationship with Jesus Christ by, helping them understand and encounter intimacy with God and community with other Christians or community with insiders, and then begin to leverage their influence in the community, their leverage with people who are outside the local church. And so from the very beginning, we have tried to just bear down and ask the question, what is the most efficient, what is the most effective way Christians can impact their community, influence other people, not to get them into something so we can get something from people, but because most of us agree that Jesus offered something to us, and our responsibility is to simply make sure we are offering that to the people in our community and the people who are within our network of friends and family members. Now, the other interesting thing, and then I'm jumping to something super specific, the other interesting thing is, just as 21 years ago, we broke with some pretty hard and fast traditions that we had grown up with in church. 2,000 years ago, when the church really got its start, the church also had to make a very contentious break with some deeply held traditions. As you may know, most of Jesus' early followers in the first century were all Jewish. So consequently, they were Jewish people. They had a Jewish scripture. They had their own Bible. Jesus was Jewish. Jesus seemed to be the fulfillment of the Jewish scriptures. So it made perfect sense to the Jewish people in the first century that Jesus was a continuation of what had been going on before. So consequently, to become a Jesus follower, you first had to become Jewish. But this was complicated because becoming a Jewish person as an adult, it meant a whole new worldview. You had to memorize 600 and something laws. You had to go to the temple. It was very, very complicated. But there were a lot of Jewish Christians that said, hey, it's complicated, but we've been doing it our life. Step up, Gentiles, and join the club, because if you're gonna follow Jesus, our Messiah, you first have to become Jewish. So there was a conflict in the church, big, big, big conflict. And this all kind of culminated or kind of came to a head about 20 years after the resurrection. So this went on for the first 20 years in church history, 20 years. And finally, there was a meeting in Jerusalem. It's the first church meeting that was recorded for us. It's found in the book of Acts, chapter 15. And here's what happened. A group came from both sides of this argument. One group made their case and they said, Gentiles have to be Jewish to be Jesus followers. Gentiles have to be Jewish to be Christians because Jesus is the Jewish Messiah, so they need to get on board with Judaism. Another group said, no, this Jesus thing is brand new. This Jesus thing is not a continuation of anything. This Jesus thing is something that God has done unique during our time, and whereas the Jewish religion and Judaism birthed it, this is something that begins anew and moves forward. That the Old Testament and the Old Covenant was essentially a cocoon that birthed this beautiful butterfly that was going to influence the whole world. They didn't use that analogy. I made that up. Okay, so they're having this conflict. Is this a continuation or is it something new? So finally, the Apostle Peter, who was like big deal in the Jerusalem church because he was one of Jesus' original followers, Peter gets up and gives a little speech and says, look, I understand why you think Christianity is a continuation of Judaism. And Peter said, I used to think the same thing. And then I had an experience, and he talked about an encounter that he had at a Gentile's home, a guy named Cornelius. Then Paul got up and said, I agree with Peter. I've been traveling all over the Gentile world, and all over the Gentile world, men and women are embracing Jesus as the one sent from God to save the world from their sins. And we do not need to require them to become Jews before they become Jesus followers. So this went back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. So they finally decided that Peter and the Apostle Paul and others were correct, that this was a new thing, and this was such a big deal. And they detached Christianity, they detached the church from the Old Testament in Acts chapter 15. It's a big, big deal. Now, we were at stake. Those of you who are Gentiles, we were at stake. We were kind of waiting down in Antioch to find out, what's going to happen. So at the end of this meeting, this is why I'm telling you this story. At the end of the meeting, James, the brother of Jesus, and James had a lot of influence in the Jerusalem church, immediately following the resurrection because he's the brother of Jesus. Oh, the stories he could tell, It's like Jesus okay, I wouldn't share that, James. So James, the brother of Jesus, stands up in this meeting and he makes a statement that we have been quoting and repeating for years and years and years. And here's what happened. The text says, when they finished the meeting, James spoke up. So James walks out to this, takes the floor, and he says, brothers, he said, listen to me. And here's what he said. It is my judgment, therefore, that we should not make it difficult for the Gentiles who are turning to God. He says, here's the summary of this whole argument. Here's the whole conversation wrapped up in one statement. We should, going forward, it is my judgment that we should not make it difficult. In other words, anything that is an unnecessary obstacle, anything that is an impediment for a Gentile turning to our God, we should remove it. We should not do anything that makes it difficult. You will find this verse printed all over this building, all over the building that you're in the hallways, on posters, placards, things on desks. This verse is everywhere because this really does serve as the filter for our programming, our budgeting, our messaging, even our community involvement. And eventually it led us to this statement, that we're a church that creates churches that unchurched people love to attend. That we create churches that unchurched people love to attend. That we decided we're gonna do a lot of things for Christians, a lot of things for families, but at the end of the day, we wanna be a group of people who took the words of James to heart, and we have removed every single unnecessary obstacle so that people who are turning to God, curious about God, interested in God, that nothing would get in their way except the one thing that always gets in everybody's way, and the one thing that should get in everybody's way, and that is the question, who is Jesus? Who is Jesus is the only thing that should get in the way of a person following Jesus. And at some point, everybody has to answer that question for themselves. But in the meantime, we as a group of church folks and we as a group of churches should do everything we can to make it easy for those who are asking that question and trying to wrestle that particular question to the floor. So today what I want to do for just a few minutes is I want to talk a little bit about how we do that. And the reason I want to talk about how we do that is because it's how we do that. It is not how I do that. It's not how Clay does that. It's not how Gavin does that. It's not how any of our lead pastors or staff does this. This is an everybody thing. And the reason that you love your church, if you attend one of our churches and you love it, the reason you love your church is because a whole bunch of folks got involved and understood their role in making this a church that unchurched people love to attend. The reason that you need to know this is because you are our church. You are your church. As you go, we go. Now, if this is your first time back in church after being out for a long time, or somebody invited you or bribed you with lunch, or maybe you're in a situation where, well, you can spend the night this weekend, but you know we go to church, which means, and you're going with us, whatever got you here, we're so glad that you're here. And this is the perfect Sunday for you to be here, because today we're gonna pull back the curtain for about 15 more minutes and talk about why we do what we do. So if there's any question in your mind as in terms of what's the agenda and what are these folks up to, there's gonna be no question. We're gonna make that perfectly clear. And I'll make it perfectly clear up front so you don't have to wonder. Here's why we do what we do. We have concluded that following Jesus will make your life better and will make you better at life. And the reason we believe that is because following Jesus has made our lives better and has made us better at life. We're not trying to earn our way into heaven. We're not trying to earn our way into God's good graces. Christians believe that all of that has already been done, and the Christian life is simply a response to God's grace and God's mercy in the world. So our agenda is this. We are convinced, and we would love to gently as possible convince you that your life will be better following Jesus, and he'll make you better at life. You'll be a better husband, father, mother, teacher. You'll be a better employee, a better employer. You'll be a better citizen. You'll be a better student. You'll be a better friend. You'll be a better everything. So we believe that following Jesus will make you better at life, because it has made our lives better and has certainly made us much, much better at life. So we're gonna talk a little bit about why we do what we do. We want you to understand it because we, as a member or as a part of one of our local churches, you are a very, very important part of it. So here's the bottom line in case you have to leave early or your electricity goes out. Here it is. Here's what we just want you to remember. Every time you are associated with anything that has anything to do with your church, here's what we want you to remember. We want guests to know. Guest is somebody who's a church person guest, a non-church person guest, a visitor from out of town, somebody who lives in the community and keeps getting caught in the traffic and thinks, what's going on there? A guest that, their kids have been coming and now the kids have invited them to come. Believers, not believers, skeptics, smart people, people who are getting smarter, it doesn't matter. Any guest. We want guests to know that we know they're here and we're happy about it. That's the bottom line. We want anybody who's here for the first time, regardless of their background or their belief system, we want our guests to know that we know they're here and that we are happy about it. You can say it this way. Our mandate in terms of what we're gonna talk about for the next few minutes is we want to assume guest in the room. Assume guest in the room. It's not grammatically correct. That's why there's no period. Assume guest in the room. Now, this is a way bigger deal than you may think, and this is where churches get this wrong all the time. I'll give you an example, and I am picking on churches, but I won't name them. You have all probably, if you grew up in church, attended a church, and on your way out of the church parking lot, just as you got to the edge of the parking lot, there's a sign facing inward, and it said, you are now entering the mission field. That is a terrible idea. Here's why it's a bad idea. Because the assumption is we're in here, and they're out there. We are not that church, and we will never be that church as long as you help us ensure that we never become that church. Years ago, we had a huge singles Bible study at North Point Community Church called 722. Some of you went to 722. There are children in middle school who were born as a result of singles who met in 722, okay? That's how long ago it was. And the reason this is an old story is because what I'm about to share with you happened once, and we have worked hard never to allow it to happen again. So thousands of people would come to hear Louis Giglio speak, fabulous music. And a few years in, Louis took some weeks off, as every once in a while he would do. And there was a guy who had just come to town, a famous preacher guy, and he asked if he could speak at 722. He actually asked, and we thought, well, that'd be great. You're a good guy, good communicator. And he wanted to do a series for singles, and we're like, well, we got a couple thousand singles, so come come on over. And on week 2, he did something that absolutely infuriated me. On week 2, there was a pop singer whose name you all know and know her music, and everybody in the world knows her name. And she was in the news for some really dumb stuff that she had done, and everybody was talking about it. And right in the middle of this message, he just goes off on her and is using her as an example of a bad example of what he was talking about. Well, I was furious for 2 reasons. Number 1, we don't talk bad about people. There's like a verse about that, okay? You don't talk bad about famous people either. They're not exempt. I mean, be ye kind one to another. He was not being kind one to anybody, but it's easy to go off on famous people because and plus it was just an easy kind of amen line. But the second reason I was so mad, 2 months earlier, she was in town for a concert and some friends invited her to church and they brought her to 722. Yeah, 2 months earlier, they snuck her in the back with her bodyguard, some people trying to influence her in the right direction. She was actually there. Imagine if she had shown up the night the guest speaker goes off on her as a bad example. I was just furious. And the reason I was furious is because we're not the mission fields out there and we're in here and we're the holy huddle and let's go out there and try to, no. We are we. And every single person, regardless of what you believe in, regardless of where you are on the spiritual continuum, you are welcome here because here's what we know, we're not that different. Okay, we get up the same time, we go to the same kind of jobs, we put our pants on the same way, we raise our kids the same. There's so much similarity. The whole idea that we are some sort of strange alien group of people that is unlike the people out there is absolutely completely false. There is no we, they. There is just us. And some of us have discovered something extraordinary, that following Jesus will make your life better and will make you better at life. So the mandate is to assume there are guests in the room. Assume there are guests in the room. Now I want to give you 3 other questions I want to talk about briefly to kind of fill in some of the gaps and to get you thinking about this because this is something for all of us. And the 3 questions are simply this. What do they see? What do they hear? What do they experience? What do they see? What do they hear? What do they experience? When people hear about us, when people see us, when people experience us as a local church, what do they see? What do they hear? And what do they experience? Let's talk about this first one. What do they see? How about this one? Do our facilities look like we're expecting guests and their children? Do our facilities look like we're expecting guests and their children? This is a really, really big deal. Let me ask you a question. When does your house look the best? When you're expecting? Yeah, it rhymes, right? Your house looks best when you're expecting? Your house looks? When you're expecting? Yeah, and so should ours. Now, this is a really big deal. Did you know that all of us are on trash detail? Every single one of us? Did you know when you're in the restroom back here and there's water all over the counter, the minute you think, I wonder where facilities are, look in the mirror. There's a mirror right there. Facilities. Yeah, I think I'll get a paper towel and wipe this sink off. Why? This is our house. Years ago at North Point, we had 3 services in a row, and between second and third service, I would usually leave unless I thought my throat could, make it for 3 services. So on the way out, we just had 2 transits, and I went through the transit hallway to get out to my car, and I had a policeman that would walk with me. I don't know why. I'm not dangerous, but they'd always make a policeman walk with me. And then my administrative assistant and one of our production folks, because there was 3 questions I have to answer every Sunday, and they need the answer. So we all 4 of us walk out to the car having this conversation. And we're walking through transit, and transit usually gives out candy. Also, the upstreet hallway ends right there. And so there's generally little, pieces of trash on the floor. So I'm walking along, and I pick up trash everywhere I go. I mean, this is my house. I want this place to look great. So I'd pick up trash. So finally, after about 3 weeks of that, the police officer, he's picking up trash too. And then my administrative assistant, now we're the trash patrol. We talk and just pick up all the candy wrappers. And I would notice this. I would pick it up and I'd go over and put it in the trash can. And I would see people watching me because there's Andy. He's picking up trash. There's someone get some trash too. Now everybody's picking up trash, right? Why? Well, because that's my job. That's my responsibility. This is our house. And you know what? Your house looks best when you're expecting guests. And this is why we work so hard to make sure our facilities are awesome, because we're doing a very, very, very important thing. And every single weekend, we are expecting people, right? Here's one. Do guests see themselves? Do guests see themselves? When I say, there it is, do guests see themselves? In other words, when people show up, do they see people like them? The reason people like a church is not the preaching. The reason people like a church is because who's in the church that they connect with. So it's very important to us that at all the doors, on the platform, anywhere public, greetings, signing in kids at Upstreet or Transit, we want there to be all kinds of people that reflect everybody in the community. Because we want people to show up and say, oh, there's my people. I think I have some, we may not believe the same, but there's somebody in my season of life. There's somebody in my stage of life. This is why we put high school students together, middle school students together. This is why we do single series every once in a while so that singles can walk into a room and go, oh, okay, there's some of me here. This is why we do NP nights at North Point nights at North Point Community Church at 7 o'clock on Sunday evenings. We wanted a place for 20-something-year-olds to walk in and go, oh, okay, there are some of me here. If you are married with kids, you see yourself everywhere, right? I mean, we are the Married with Kids church, but we want to make sure people can see themselves so that when people come for the first time, it's like, oh, okay, I think there's some people here I could connect with. There's some people kind of like me. Second question is, what do they hear? What do they see and what do they hear? Do we have a good reputation in the community? When people hear Woodstock City Church, when people hear North Point Community Church, when people hear Decatur City Church, what comes to mind? Do we have a good reputation in the community? Now, if this is your first time, I'm gonna brag for just a minute, so bear with me. But if you've been here for a long time, let me tell you, you knock it out of the state, not just the park, the state. What you do in this capacity is unbelievable. Some of you don't know this. If you attend Buckhead Church, you know this. There's Woodson Park Academy is a large under-resourced school. Buckhead Church, get this, has provided a mentor for every single student in that school. A one-on-one mentor for every single student in this very large school. Isn't that great? So, that community views Buckhead Church as a stakeholder in the community. In other words, we don't want that church to go away. Not too long ago, North Point Community Church, you were honored as a Blue Ribbon Partner of the Year for 2 Fulton County schools. Brownsbridge received a similar award for Forsyth County schools. Then one of my favorite illustrations of how well we do this, several years ago, MARTA was redoing the Buckhead station, and so when they built a bridge to make it easier to access from the other side, and they redid all their signage. Check this out. Area directory, Tower Place, Buckhead Church. Now, here's the secret. Do you know how many other churches are on the MARTA signs? That would be 0, okay? Now, here's why it's all hotels and restaurants. Here's why this is a big deal. Because somewhere along the way, there was a group of people that made a decision and had a meeting about what do we need to put on these signs, and somebody brought up Buckhead Church, and nobody turned up their nose and went, oh, it's a church, it's a cult, it's like, no. They are a stakeholder in this community, and they put our name on the sign. We didn't know anything about it till all the signs were up. A few weekends ago, Gwinnett Church did an incredible thing. They hosted a Night to Shine. Do you know what Night to Shine is? Night to Shine is a Tim Tebow initiative that was basically a prom for special needs kids. 490 special needs kids show up at Gwinnett Church. Yeah. 540 high school students showed up to be their dates and about 300 volunteers. Now, the staff at Gwinnett Church, I know this for a fact, they do not have time to be doing this kind of stuff. But why do they do it? Because they understand our reputation in the community is as important as what we say on the weekends. Brownsbridge, if you're watching, you tripled the number of foster care families for Forsyth County. They love us. Decatur City Church last weekend when I talked about refugees, Decatur City Church is 15 minutes from Clarkston, Georgia. So you know what they did after the service? They said, hey, if you want to volunteer in Clarkston, we have representatives from these organizations that are working with refugees in Clarkston. They filled up all of their service opportunities. Why? Because when people hear the names of our churches, we don't want them just to hear, oh, I know where that is, and oh, it's a cool building, and I know somebody who goes there. We want them to think, I'm so glad they are in the community. Now, one of the other things that all of you can do, if you want to help your reputation in the community, is get a cling and put it on your car. This is like the greatest thing ever. Then if you have a flat tire and somebody pulls up, you look on the back and no, keep going. So somebody shows up with one of our clings, and you know they're a safe person. No, you don't want to do that? Okay. So everybody needs a cling, and here's why. There are so many of us. There's so many of us. And when you start seeing those around town, people start asking questions. Sandra and I both have great cling stories. I'm going to tell you hers, okay? Because she was going a little too fast. in Milton, Georgia, got pulled over by this nice young officer who came running up. She said she felt like maybe he was embarrassed, and anyway, it might have been his first day. Anyway, he was a great guy. So he gives her a warning and goes through the whole thing, and he's about to leave, and he says, "Ma'am, can I ask you one more question?" She says, "Sure, officer." He said, "That sticker on the back of your car, what is that? They're everywhere." She said, "It's North Point Community Church. It's where I go to church." Told him about the service and service times. He said, "Well, I see them everywhere." She said, "Well," and it was just an opportunity to talk about our church so everybody get a cling. But here's the bottom line. I got to move on. Okay, look. You are our reputation in the community. You are it. You are our reputation in the community. And you don't think of it in these terms because you're busy, but you are an ambassador. You're not just an ambassador for Jesus. You are an ambassador for a local church that does what it does in order to make it easy so it's not difficult for people who are turning to God. Here's another question under this. What do they hear? Is the communication engaging? We want to make sure that people are engaged with how we present stuff. It's why we spend so much time and money on musicians and on helping people get trained to do small groups and in transit and inside out and starting point. We want the communication to be engaging. The other question we ask is the content helpful? We want to make sure that people know what to do with what we say. We want people to know what to do with what we say. Again, this is why so oftentimes when we're asking people to serve, we're trying to find the people who have communication skills, and then we help write curriculum. We get people involved at all sorts of elements and all sorts of capacities when it comes to communication, because this is such a big deal. It's why sometimes you'll hear me say during a sermon, hey, if you're not a believer, or if you're not a Christian, or you're still trying to figure it out, you don't have to do this because this is like to Christians, but feel free to try it at home because this works. Following Jesus will make your life better even if you don't even believe in Jesus. Following Jesus will make your life better. So we try to be very, very practical when it comes to our teaching. We want people to know what to do with what we say. And then the third question is, what do they experience? What do they experience? Was it genuine? Are we believable? Are we authentic? Are we real? Are you approachable? Are you likable? You've heard me say this 1,000 times. People who were nothing like Jesus liked Jesus. People who were nothing like Jesus liked Jesus. People should like us. We should be the most likable people in the community because we're Jesus followers. And then here's another question under that question. Did we show respect for the values and views of our guests? Did we show respect for the values and views of our guests? This is another one where churches get this wrong all the time, and you are so good at this. Let's not let this slide off the plate. This is such a big deal. Here's the thing. Everybody's view makes perfect sense to them. Everybody's set of values makes perfect sense to them. So when somebody's views don't make sense to me, who has the problem? I do. I don't understand why you did that. I don't understand why you believe that. I don't understand how you could do that. Well, who's the person that doesn't understand? Not them, me. So here's the thing. There is so much space. There is so much latitude. There is so much margin in our churches for people who don't hold our views and who don't hold our values. And we don't feel compelled to bear down and force people to believe what we believe and embrace our values. That doesn't work anyway. We respect people's views and respect people's values, just like you wanted someone to respect your views and your values perhaps before you became a follower of Jesus. If there's something I don't understand, it's because I don't understand. So this is why oftentimes in messages, we will give people permission not to apply something. Hey, if you're not a Christian, this isn't for you. I mean, you can try it if you want, but I'm not asking you to do something. You're not a Jesus follower. So you've never surrendered yourself to this anyway. So this isn't for everybody. This is just for people who've opted to follow Jesus, and you're welcome to try it. But I'm not gonna say you're out and you can't come back and you can't be a part of this unless you do all of this. That's not how it worked. In fact, remember, when Jesus was here, what was his invitation? Follow me. Not obey me at first. Not even believe in me at first. Just follow me. Follow me. In fact, the first church planter, the man who planted the very first church, the Apostle Paul, he went so far as to say this. He said, what business is it of mine to judge those outside the church? What business is it of mine to judge those outside the church? What business is it of mine to shake my finger in the face of somebody outside the church? Aren't we supposed to judge those inside the church? And you know what? And you know this is true. If we had done historically a better job of judging ourselves and not judging people outside the church, there would be more people inside the church. Because we're known as the most judgmental people on the planet. And Paul, who planted the first churches, said, hey, Christians, you have no business judging people outside the church. The people outside the church, they don't hold your standards and your values anyway. So you don't have any business holding people to a standard they never embraced to begin with. And here's what you know, because this is how you came to faith. I don't know your story, the details of your story, but I know this is part of your story. We should be attractive, not coercive. Somebody attracted you to Christianity. No one coerced you if you're a believer, right? There was something attractive. Paul wrote this, I love this. He says, it is your kindness, Lord. It is your kindness, Lord, that leads us to repentance. And then here's the last question. Did we respond quickly, directly, and personally? What do they experience? Did we respond quickly, directly, and personally? When there was an issue, when there was a challenge, when something went on with one of their kids. One of the myths that you have totally dismantled as a church, one of the myths that you've totally dismantled, the myth is if it's a big church, it's an impersonal church. You know that's not the case, and you are masters at making a big church feel personal. We can't ever lose that. A few weeks ago, right here at Woodstock City Church, a young woman came to church by herself. She's married, but she came by herself. Ran into one of our guest services folks, Kelly. Kelly met her and was walking her down the hall, trying to get her, know what's going on. It's a big church, lots of people. They walked by Wombaland, and the way I understand the story, she was explaining, to this young woman what Wombaland was, because, what's Wombaland? Oh, it's for birth through kindergarten. And the woman got a bit emotional, and she said, well, that's kind of why I'm here. I just lost my 5-year-old. My 5-month-old. Just lost my 5-month-old. And so, lots of emotion. And she said, and I don't know what to do, so I just came to church. So you know what Kelly did? Kelly made it so personal. Kelly remembered there was another guest services couple who not too long ago lost an infant. She tracked them down. They left their point of service, sat down with this woman, sat with her through the church, and then followed up with her to make sure there's someone that's gonna be there for her and possibly her husband if he chooses to come. And suddenly this big church got really, 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 really personal. You are so good at this. In fact, the truth is, if you had time to share it, many of you are here, not because of what happens on this stage, but because somebody in this church made a big church a personal church for you. So here's our 3 questions that I want you to ask all the time and help us ask, because it's the only way we can continue to be a church that unchurched people love to attend. What do they see? What do they hear? What do they experience? What do they see? What do they hear? What do they experience? And please never forget, I know you know this, but please never forget, you are the church. You are our church. You are your church. Your church will never be better than you. Our church will never be better than us. And people may never fully believe what we believe and may never fully embrace the views and values that we hold, but let's be the kind of church that when they think about us, they think, I'm glad that church is in our community. Will we continue to be a church that unchurched people love to attend? I say yes. I think you say yes as well. And we will, with your help. So for those of you who are engaged, for those of you who give, for those of you who tithe, for those of you who are percentage givers, for those of you that show up late, for those of you that stay late, that show up early and stay late, or show up late and just stay even later. Thank you. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Here's the thing. You are part of every single story. You're part of every single story. You're inspiring not only people in this community, you're inspiring church leaders all over the country. In May, we'll host our Drive Conference. We do it every other year. It's for church leaders all around the country. We cut it off at 2,400 people because we don't have any more space than that for breakouts. So we'll have 2,400 church leaders from all over the country, and they will come to learn what you do so well. If you're grateful, but you're not really engaged right now, we need you. And in just a minute, your lead pastor is gonna come and explain how you can take a step to be involved. If you're watching from home online because you love online and your kids are grown and gone, you're like me, you're an empty nester, did you know we need you as well? And I understand when you get sort of outside the routine of family life in the church, you don't feel as connected. I understand that. But we need you to reconnect. And here's the thing. You're in a season that will take a little bit more intentionality. You're in a season that's gonna take a little bit more intentionality in terms of getting involved, but you're in a season that gives you a lot more flexibility, which means you have the potential to make a much bigger impact than ever before. So please, please, please don't check out of the life of your local church.